Hi, my name is Nick Deborah. I'm an independent educator and consultant in the fields of data visualization and dashboard design. And in this video, I wanted to talk about a misconception that I commonly see in organizations that I work with, where people believe that for a given set of data, it's possible to create a chart that is going to be useful regardless of who the audience for the chart is or what need they had for the data in the first place. But as I'll show you in the video, I think that this is actually kind of impossible, that these sort of general purpose charts don't really actually exist, and that it's actually impossible to create a useful chart unless you have identified a particular target audience for the graph, and you have a really good understanding of what they're going to be using the graph for, why they needed to see that data in the first place. And so to illustrate this, I'm going to start with a scenario, a hypothetical scenario. So I want you to imagine that you've volunteered to act as a test subject in a psychology experiment. You arrive at the prescribed time and location of the experiment, and a researcher asks you to watch a video of a professional tennis match and then write a description of the match. Yeah, and sure, it sounds simple enough. So you watch the video and then you turn to your laptop and start writing, but you're immediately unsure of how to actually begin. So you turn to the researcher and you ask, well, what kind of description should I write? And the researcher just answers, well, just write the most effective description of the match that you can, the text that best describes the match. But you don't find this very helpful because things like most effective or best describes, well, those could mean anything depending on what the description will actually be used for. And so you think for a moment about just a few of the potential purposes that such a description might serve. So, for example, it might be to provide readers of the losing player's city newspaper with hope for a better outcome next time. Or it might be to provide readers of the winning player's city newspaper with reasons to expect that player to make it into the finals. Or to explain tennis to somebody who knows absolutely nothing about the game. Or to get readers to watch future matches. Or to pitch a movie screenplay about the heartwarming story of the rookie player who overcame insurmountable odds to win his first professional match, or to provide a play-by-play of the match that can be read to blind audiences. And in fact, there are innumerable other audiences and purposes that this kind of description could serve. And so obviously you can't write the best or the most effective description of the match unless you know for whom you're writing the description and why you're writing it for them. If you try to write a general purpose description that would serve any purpose for any audience, it'll surely fail to fulfill most of the potential purposes that such a description might serve. And so with an unknown purpose and an unknown audience, well, you're forced to basically randomly pick an audience and invent a purpose in order to even begin writing something, knowing that the chances that those guesses are going to be right are probably pretty low. For some reason, though, we rarely seem to realize that we face this exact same problem when we're asked to create the best or most effective visualization of a given set of data. What happens much more often is that we get that kind of marching order and we start building charts with an inadequate or sometimes even non-existent understanding of the purpose, the reason why people are going to need that data and who those people are. And so just as it's impossible to write a useful description of a tennis match without an identified audience and purpose, well, it's also impossible to design an effective chart without an identified audience and purpose for that chart. So let's look at a more specific example. So let's say somebody in your organization asks you to create a graph of our company's recent headcount history. And so this might sound like a perfectly reasonable request, but I want to show you a couple of different graph designs that could fulfill that request if we assume different audiences and different reasons why they needed to see that data in the first place. So for example, if we assume that the graph is going to be used by board members who want to know if we hit our headcount target for each month since the last board meeting, which was 5 months ago, well, we might create something like this. And so here we can see each individual month, and we can see where we were below target for each month and where we are above target for each month. Or if we imagine that it's for the head of HR, who wants to know if the employee retention program that they launched in mid-July is actually reducing the employee churn or turnover. And so in that case, we might design something like this, where we're going to focus more on the new hires and departing employees. And so we can see that oh, actually, if we look at where the employee retention program started in the middle of this time period here, it actually looks like it kind of made things worse, that there are more people coming and going after the program was launched. Or let's assume that it's for the CEO, who's wondering where the recent increase in overall headcount has come from. Well, in that case, we might design something like this, which breaks down headcount by department. And so we can see that, yeah, most of the increase is coming from R&D, sales and marketing, maybe a little bit from finance and admin. So all of these graphs are based on exactly the same underlying headcount data, and all are honest, potentially useful responses to the request for a graph of our company's recent headcount history. As we can see, though, the design varies a lot. It's very different when we assume different audiences and purposes. And so unless we have a very clear idea of who the target audience is and why they need to see that data, well, we're unable to determine which one of these designs, or a virtually infinite number of other possible designs, would actually be the best or the most effective way to visualize this particular data. So yeah, life would be simpler if it were possible to create these kinds of general purpose or one-size-fits-all charts for a given set of data. But the messy reality, though, is that any chart that we might create for any data set is inevitably going to serve some audiences and purposes well and others not, even if we're trying to be completely audience and purpose agnostic. Ultimately, this will actually always be the case, because creating a data visualization is always an act of summarization, unless our chart consists of a raw text dump of everything, of all disaggregated values. And whenever we're summarizing anything, whether it's a tennis match or a set of employee headcount data, we must remove detail, filter information, group and aggregate lower level information into higher level information. We have to choose what to highlight and what to downplay or leave out, and when to bring in external information, like a player's life story or the launch date of the employee retention program. And so unless we have a really clear idea of why we're summarizing the information and for whom, we can't make any of those decisions. And if we power through and try to create a summary anyway, well, we'll be targeting a randomly chosen audience and a made-up purpose, even if we don't realize that that's what we're doing and mistakenly believe that we're actually creating a general purpose summary. Ultimately, though, the result will be the same, which is a summary or a chart that won't be as useful as it could be, or that might even be useless to the people who receive it. Now, unfortunately, the misconception that general purpose charts exist is widespread, and I see the kind of sad consequences of it all the time in organizations with which I work, where decision makers are often frustrated by the data visualizations that they receive. And yes, this frustration is often due to a lack of basic data visualization skills amongst those who are creating the charts. But just as often, it arises because no one involved realizes that useful charts can only be created when the people who create them know exactly why and for whom they're creating those charts. I also see this problem regularly in data visualization contests, where participants are asked to design the most effective or the best visualization of a given set of data, but where no purpose or audience are being specified by the contest organizers. So in my view, those kinds of contests aren't very meaningful because the effectiveness of different chart designs can't be judged without first defining what effect the chart is supposed to have in the first place. So the next time you're asked to just create a chart of this data, but you don't know who the audience is or what they're going to be using the data for, you have to do some digging until you finally understand exactly what those are. And if the audience is very sophisticated or if the purpose is very complex, well, you better start learning, because you'll need to understand those things in order to design useful charts. And if your audience is still asking, well, why do you need to know what we're going to be doing with this? Why do you still need to know the purpose of this in order to design useful charts? Well, you can always send them a link to this video. For more videos and blog posts like this, please visit our website, practicalreporting.com. And thanks for watching.